back, everyone. We are moving on to hands, and we are up to number 11 in this series. Oh my gosh. But anyway, we're starting out with some wire, and it's set to make it about 1.5 times the size of the head, which, means hopefully that the head is the right size. But so I've got 10 pieces cut, 5 for each hand. We're going to be using some white glue, and we're also going to be using some cotton. This is the only cotton I had, so you don't have to use these rounds. Just have to be the only kind of cotton I had. So that's what we'll be using. And basically just want to shred it and get some really thin pieces, because what we have to do is build up a little bit on the fingers of the hand so that we can apply clay to it. Otherwise, it's just not going to stick to the bare wire. So you're going to take some glue, put a little bit on there and smooth it out. And then we're going to we're just going to roll it around on this wire. I've sort of stretched out a piece of that cotton so that it's very thin. Doesn't have to be completely even, because mine sure isn't. But just put it on there and then roll it, and then you'll be able to press it down with your finger and make it smooth against the wire. And always, like the first one I do is probably not thick enough. I'll figure that out later, but it dries pretty quick, so that's good. It was easy to put more on. And I'm just using this sponge sander that I have to stick these into it so they can dry standing up. And that, it's going to be very handy, so just keep that in mind as a possibility. You're going to have somewhere to dry these things. You don't want to lie them down or they'll stick to whatever you lay them on. All right, so from now on, I'm just going to keep doing that until we get 10 of these little puppies made. All right, so with the magic of editing, I'll come back when they're all done and they're all dry. At this point, now we can start putting together the hands, and I'm going to put them together with different lengths because fingers are different lengths. And I'll put the thumb on last, but basically I'm going to line them up. I don't want to cut them. I want to have the cotton be at the point, but you can see, the little finger, of course, is small, and the ring finger is a little bit shorter. The index finger and the middle finger are almost the same, but the index finger is a tiny bit shorter, and then the thumb, of course, comes in much lower, so that's why we're gonna attach it after we attach the other 5 fingers. So just sort of line them up in the length that we talked about, and you can look at a doll or look at your own hand to sort of figure that out. But line them up, and then you're going to have some string. They said in the book embroidery string, but here's the way I've got them lined up, just so you can see. I just had some thick twine here, and that's what I'm going to use. You just want something that, is not going to break when you start wrapping it around and tying it. So just start wrapping it around, and then you're going to tie it off, and after you have it nice and tight, then you can put some glue on the thread to harden, and that will hold it in place better. Otherwise, those wires are just going to move around a lot, and you won't be able to put the clay on very easily. Once you start putting the clay on, it'll harden, but you just don't want these moving around a lot, because you're also going to have to be bending them to make them into the position of the fingers that you want to have for your doll. So just wrap it around really tightly, and then you can just sort of make a loop, put this thread through the loop, and tie it off. And once you do that, then you can put some glue on it. All right, so now I'm just putting a little glue on that thread down at the bottom just to hold it and keep the fingers in the position that you want them in. We'll have to let that dry before we put the thumb on, so we'll come back in a minute and do that. I'm going to do the other hand, of course, real quickly, and we'll let that be drying too, and then we can put the thumbs on both hands. Now, I did realize on some of these that I had to add more cotton to them, but that's fine. I mean, you can do that. And you want to keep looking back and forth at the two hands to see that they're the same size and the fingers are in basically the same position. You don't want to have two hands that are different. That would really look weird. All right. So basically the same procedure as the other hand. Take a look. Make sure you got it basically same length of fingers and that they're sticking out about the same. And I mean, if you had an emergency and you had to cut something off, you could, but I like the cotton being on the end of the tips because it makes them look more rounded as you're putting the clay on. But these look like they're doing pretty well, being the same size. So we're going to let those dry for a little bit, come back a little bit later. And now we're ready to put the thumbs on. So we're going to take the thumb and position it lower, and then we'll tie it off as well. So just think about, look at your own hand and see how the thumb comes out so much lower than the knuckles of the other hand. And move it down until you get it in the right position. It looks like a hand. Well, like a skeleton hand. And then use your thread. Same procedure. Wrap it up. Make a loop, tie it off, put some glue on it, and we'll let it dry. And then we'll do the same procedure for the other hand. And once we get them both done, we can take a look and make sure we, again, have them the same size and same length of fingers. So looking pretty good. So at this point, we're ready to position the fingers the way we want them, and keeping in mind that the fingers should be bent. You don't want to have just straight, splayed out fingers. That would look very unnatural, like perpetual jazz hands. And I think looking at pictures or looking at another doll is really helpful because they like to position the hands in sort of a graceful way. I mean, if you wanted to also think about, I want this doll to be able to hold something, you might want to have it with one hand, with the fingers curved to grip it, but I didn't really want to deal with that. So I'm just going to make them try to look a little bit like, artistic. And remember, the thumbs come out of the hand a little differently than the rest of the fingers. So that is the thumb I'm working on now, and I'm just bending it out a little bit so that it's going to stick away from the palm of the hand appropriately. And then just bending the fingers so that they have a somewhat graceful look to them. I don't know, graceful's the word, but if you're doing a certain theme with a doll, if you want it to have certain hand features, you would think about that. But like Edward Scissorhands or something, I don't know. But anyway, just try to make them look like a hand is the biggest thing, and in a natural pose. If you have them so that they're not bent in the right way as a finger would look, it's going to just make the hand look weird. Okay, so now we're going to take a little bit of clay, spray some water in it, and we're going to smoosh it up and make a slurry. Just going to make a clay paste, and then we're going to begin a very painstaking process of painting the fingers with this. This is really the best way that I've found to do fingers. There's just no way to wrap actual clay around that and make it work. I've done another doll out of clay, and this works pretty well. I mean, this is a pretty thick paste. You don't want it to be too thin, or you're going to be there doing this for the rest of your life, but you also don't want it to be so thick that it's lumpy and you can't, appropriately build it up. Being able to build this up is what's going to make it look more natural and also make it more sturdy. So we're just working on the fingers right now. I'm going to come back later and put some clay in the palm and the back of the hand, but for right now I wanted to build up the fingers a little bit. And also wanted to get some clay on that cotton so that when I put the pad of clay down on the front and back of the palm, it'll stick to it. Because clay does not stick well to just this plain wire. Okay, so we've got our hands. They're kind of shaped. They've got a coat or two of the slurry paste. And I didn't show you every single coat of that because I'm telling you this was hours and hours, because you have to let it dry in between. So I spared you guys some of that, and I'll show you even most of the process, but I did do some of the build-up off camera because it was just taking forever. And sometimes, like when you're doing this sort of work, you don't have to let it dry overnight because the coat is so thin. You could let it dry, an hour or two. So I would go do some work, do my other work, the paying job that I have, and then come back and put another coat on of the clay paste and let it dry, and then come back and do another one. The most important thing here is, though, to try to keep the position and shape of the fingers. It's still a little bendable at this point, not completely stiff, doesn't have enough clay on it, so it can get kind of out of whack. And I know it looks a little weird right now, but you kind of just have to envision it in terms of how it's going to be once you get a lot more clay on it to look like flesh. But right now, you could imagine that it's more of a skeleton hand. All right, now I'm putting a blob of clay there in the palm, and then I'm going to put one on the back of the hand also, and this will make it build up a whole lot faster. You don't want to have to make that part of it build up. So use your tools. You can use that metal tool. You can use a paintbrush that you wet. Those are both really good things to use for molding this clay. And, again, you're going to just keep looking back and forth and working on both hands. Once you get the two hands with the palm and the back, we're going to put some more of the paste on the fingers. And that's going to help mold the clay that you added to the finger part. And then it's just a process of adding more. Now, once we get it pretty close to where we want it to be in terms of thickness for both the fingers and the hand, then we can do some detail work. But for now, we're just making them fatter. I had to readjust that just a little bit. Another little tip is, as you're doing some of this work and you're having to add clay, but you're not doing it all at one time, if you have a little ball of clay, you can keep it in the fist of one hand so that it's cut off from the air, and then just pull from it. It's just a tool to help you. But you can keep this slurry from drying out. Just cover up your little cup with some aluminum foil, and it stays overnight. It's not bad. All right, so we've got a little bit more flesh on the hands. They're starting to look a little bit less skeletal. Now at this point, you kind of want to look at it versus the arm too, because you want to make sure you got the hand the right size. You want to look at, how much more you're going to have to add, because I think the fingers are still a little bit too long. So anytime you're adding clay to dry clay, as you know, hopefully by now, you want to wet it. Not too wet, just spray it with your water spray and maybe dry it just a little bit. And then you're going to just take little pieces of clay to add to the areas that you want to build up. And you can keep that other blob of clay in the fist, as I have on the left side. You see I have that. It's away from the air and it won't dry out. You can keep using it. So we're going to just keep adding, building up the palm. If you look at your hand, you'll see how you want to build up the flesh. There's certainly pads of muscle and fat in hands, just like there are in other parts of the body. And if you get that looking right, then the hand will look like an actual hand. And that's what we're after here. His hands are still way too thin, so we're really going to have to, be adding more clay to them. And each time I add a lot of clay, I have to let them dry, which I just broke away to do for a little bit. And now we're going to put more of the paste, which is still actually moist on the fingers. I'm using this brush. It's kind of got a almost, it's not super stiff, but it's stiffer than some, but it's nice because you can actually use it in molding, sometimes with the clay, but it's also really good for putting clay on these tiny areas. It's small enough, and also it's not so soft that the clay won't come off of the brush. Just keep adding and adding until you feel like you get the hand the size that it needs to be. Very painstaking process. This took days and days. As you probably know, I've been working on it ever since the last video. So, okay, at this point, we're looking at, our hand, we have those two pads at the thumb, we have the pads up at the fingers, and the pad over on the other side. And as the hand moves, those form different shapes. So you want to look at the shape of your hand, the position, and then you're going to take a little bit of clay and put it at the base of the thumb and on the other side, opposite that. Again, you want to spray that dried clay so that you get a good contact with the new wetter clay. So I'm starting with a ball on the side of the hand near the pinky, under the pinky, and then we'll come back and do one near the thumb later. And then you're also going to have to add some up underneath where the fingers are, because there is a ridge of tissue there that sticks out a little bit more. And then a little bit later we'll come in and put some lines. But right now I'm doing that pad that's up near the fingers. Just stick it on, and then you can use your tool, either that metal tool or the wet paintbrush, to mold those down into the dried clay. I didn't try to get too detailed, I'll be honest, because, I've told you this before. This is my first time trying to do this sort of doll, so that in itself is enough of a challenge. But to try to make them look super, super realistic, it's just, I just don't have the stamina for that right now, trying to figure all this out. The book is great in terms of showing pictures of things, but it's not exactly in order of how I think it should be done. So I have to look ahead to different parts, because sometimes how you put things together depends on how they're going to be used. A little bit later when we're adding the ball to the joint of the hand, I think knowing how that's going to go on the hand helps you know how you're molding the other part. But that was later on in the book. So if you're following along on this book and you see that I'm doing things kind of a little bit out of order, that is true. That is very, very true. But I'm doing that because it didn't make sense for me to do a lot of molding or sculpting when I didn't know how something was going to fit with, the arm, or how the ball was going to be attached. So it's about this time I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the wire that I'm using, and I know from looking ahead that I had to cut that out, but this wire maybe is a little thicker than what they used in the book, but it's what I had on hand, so that's what I decided to use. I'm putting a little extra on the bottom of the thumb there, just because that part of the hand does stick out a little bit more where the thumb is, and I felt like I needed a little bit more there to make it look realistic. That was really on the outside of the hand, and then I need to add more to the palm, to that little pad at the base of the thumb too. Sometimes you have to let this stuff dry to be able to move on to another point. If you keep working on an area, you can get the clay out of shape. So if it starts to do that, just let it dry. You can always come back and add more or sand off. So don't get too frustrated with it. I'd really love to hear if any of you guys are trying to make one of these dolls too. Or maybe you're waiting to see how mine turns out. But I think it's an interesting project. No matter how it turns out, it's been very interesting, and I think I've learned a lot. And I enjoy working with air dry clay. I've made one other doll, not a ball jointed doll, but it's just a static doll that has a specific costume. I'll maybe show it to you at the end here, but not this video, but later on. But I did the hands the same way, so I had a little bit of practice. All right, so these are our hands dried after adding some additional clay to the palms and the back of the hand. So now we're going to build up again the fingers because they're still a little bit too thin. And as you do this, you can always add a little bit more to the front and back of the hand too. It's not a huge thickness, but I think it helps to keep it smooth looking so that the fingers flow into the lower part of the hand and not just have a blob where the fingers are. All right, so this is after they've dried a little bit more. You can probably tell from the way my clothes look and my fingernails look that it's a different day. So I'm looking now again at the hand to see, it's looking like it's about the right size at this point. If you look at it with the arm and it looks, proportional, then you're probably getting to about the right size. And also to make sure they're the same size as both hands. I'm using this 3M sanding sponge because it has very, very fine grit. And I want to get in between the fingers now because they're still a little rough. You can't really tell, I don't think, so much in the video, but they're even though it's a smooth coat going on, it's still rough. And there's little also indentions where clay maybe didn't exactly get into, or the hairline fractured type look. So if you use this sponge, I even cut off some of the sponge on one end so it was able to go in between the fingers, and you just kind of can saw back and forth. You can get in between them. And that was one of the reasons too. I wanted to have the fingers separated. I didn't want to have them together, and some dolls are like that because I think it's kind of a lazy way to do hands, but I didn't want it to. I wanted it to look a little bit natural anyway, even though I'm not going to go 100% realistic. Now, keeping in mind, we're still going to have to put the ball on, so it doesn't have to be 100%, where you think it's going to be. If you need to do a little adjusting later, we'll be able to do that. Actually, we'll be able to do adjusting right up to the point that we put this, whatever other coat goes on top of this. I don't really know what that is yet. I have to do a little research, but we are going to be putting a coating on top of the clay to make it smooth and a little bit harder and make it look like a doll. Make it look like a ball jointed doll. Right now it looks like a clay doll. And I'm assuming, given that this is how, Yoshida did it in the book, that he used the doll he made as a doll to mold. So like once you get a doll made, then you mold it, you make a mold of it, then you can actually pour resin and make a resin doll out of the mold. That's the only way I can figure out that these artists can make any money, because we've been working on this for weeks, maybe months at this point. If you had to charge enough for one doll that takes you 2 months to make, you'd have to charge $50,000 for it, and nobody would buy it. So just still working on sanding the hands and getting them in the right shape and getting them so they're realistic looking. I'm even considering if I might want to try to make a mold out of this doll, if it turns out okay. Obviously, if it turns out like crap, I'm not going to want to look at it again because I've spent so much time on it. But if it turns out really good, maybe I'll try to make a mold. I'm pretty experienced with mold making because I did make silicone babies, and if you haven't seen that lengthy series, you can check out my channel. They're all there making silicone babies. I even made a silicone baby Yoda. I actually made 2 of them because I made one and I thought I could sell them, and then Disney decided to crack down on everybody on Etsy who had anything that resembled a baby Yoda. But mold making is an interesting thing to try, and I think this would be a great project if I really thought that I could make more dolls, if I could make resin dolls. then I'll try it. Shoot, we'll make a video about it, right? It's not like, I always know what I'm doing. We'll just try it. So just still here working on the hands, chatting away to you because this is so lengthy, but let's take a look at the book. There are lines where the palm is and also where the joints are on the back of the hand for the fingers. So I'm going to do that next. And what I will say about that is be very careful and don't make the cuts too deep because you're going to end up cutting off the clay. There's just not that much clay there. So just be very careful and make some very light cuts on the back of the fingers in the two places where the joints are. And then you can either use the tip of an X-Acto or you can use a pointy tool to make the lines that go in the creases of the hand. So the other thing I'll say about this is when you first make the cuts, it does not look realistic. It just looks like cuts on the hand. They're too sharp looking. So after you've made all the cuts, you can go back with that fine sandpaper, the 3M sandpaper that has the foam backing, and just lightly sand it, and that sort of mutes the sharpness that you created with the knife and makes it look more realistic. So the other thing you can do after you put the ball on, if you wanted to put another coat of the paste over everything, I think that would soften how the creases look also without filling them completely in. So there's a couple of tips for you. I thought I was going to do fingernails, but I think what I'll do for fingernails after I saw that just didn't work really well would be when the doll's finished and it's coated with whatever coat it is we're going to put on it, is to take that color and add a little pinkish, very faint pink to it and paint that on. All right, so now we got to cut down the wrist area and get rid of that wire. And then we'll put the ball on top of that area. And then that's what we'll attach to the hand. Now I'm assuming, I think from all I can tell, honestly this wasn't clearly explained, but I don't believe we need a hollow ball for the wrist joint. It's one that you're going to carve a ridge out in the middle. So right now I'm just going to mark where I want to start cutting off the hand or the wrist part, and then we'll cut that clay part off, and then we're going to try to cut that wire down as close as we can to the clay. We don't want to have that sticking up or the ball is just not going to fit in there. So after you have that marked, then you can just use your knife, your X-Acto or whatever tool like that you're using, and just start carving up. Don't carve down toward the wrist or you'll cut off the nice clay that you want to keep. Another thing I noticed when I was doing this is, boy, did I put a lot of glue on that string. Man, that was because that's what I'm carving against right now. And it was tough to get that off. But I'm using my little jewelry pliers that have a little fine needle point, and not pliers, I'm sorry, wire cutter, and just cutting down into the clay as far as I can to get rid of as much wire as I can. And then, we're just going to go down and clean up some around the edges. We're going to be putting clay here to attach the ball, so it doesn't have to be super clean, super shaped, but just really trying to get down to get as much of that wire out as I can. Another tip, close your eyes or wear safety glasses while you're doing this, because cutting these little pieces of wire, they go flying everywhere. So as you get it positioned, close your eyes and then cut. I think these little pieces of wire are all over my room. All right, I think we got that pretty well done. We're ready to, I did do the other hand, but I didn't show it on camera, but yeah, make sure you get the hands the same size. And then you're going to have a ball of clay, and you can just roll it in between your hand, get it as round as possible. And then you want to look at it versus the arm. You want about 1/3 of the ball to go into the arm. And I mean, it looked like it when I looked at it then. It looked like that was about 1/3. I'll be honest, after I let it dry, I don't know what happened. It wasn't going into it, and I'll show you what I did to solve that. But what you're aiming for is 1/3 of the ball to go into the wrist of the arm. That's the goal. You want to have enough going in that it looks natural, looks like a wrist, but not so much that it's not movable. So now to attach the ball, we're just going to roll out a little thin rope of clay. Oh yeah, I did cut my finger with the X-Acto knife. I don't know if you can see on my left hand that red place up near the nail on the side. Yeah, I did slice into my finger real nicely. So put some water down into that crevice of the hand to make sure it's nice and moist and wet. Sorry, I said moist. I know people don't like that word for some reason. And then you're going to put a little ring of your rolled out clay, set the ball on top of that. I did let the balls dry, by the way. They are not still wet. Otherwise they wouldn't keep their shape while you're trying to do this. But you want a small piece of clay because you don't want to have a whole lot to add to the hand because it's already in a pretty nice sculpted look. So just enough to attach the ball, and then you can I'm using the paintbrush that's wet with water to smooth out the clay down onto the hand and up onto the ball. And I really didn't think I got that much on the ball, but apparently I did, because then when I looked at it after it dried, it just didn't seem to fit that well into the arm. I'll show you that in a minute. But just do both hands, get them looking the same, make sure the ball is sticking up the same amount from both hands. Alright, so we've got our hands dried now with the balls on them. And I can't stop sanding if I see a little place, but you don't have to do that. You can wait until you get closer to the end to do the final touches. Now I am going to sand this a little bit. I wanted to sand down the sides so that it melds well with the hand. It doesn't look like it was stuck on there. I just want it to look like one piece. And then we're going to try it against the arm and show you what I was talking about with the ball. There's just no way to sand down the ball enough. If there's any places that are sticking out, you can use your X-Acto to scrape them down. So I did sand it quite a bit, but then when you look at it, it just really is not even maybe a fourth. I don't even know if it's a fourth going in there. And I'm looking at it like, what did I do? How did the ball get bigger? But I don't know. It seems to just be. And I even looked at it versus I was like, well, maybe I was looking at the other arm. But no, it's just not enough of it going in that hole. So at this point, I'm going to show you a technique to make the ball smaller that will work a little bit faster than trying to sand it, and also will make it round, which is another big consideration here. You do want to worry about the balls being round, or they're not going to rotate well into the socket. So you can take a circle template and just hold that ball in the water for a little bit to soften the clay on the top a little bit. You don't want to get it too far down soft. And then just start out where the ball is now and make it even. And you just want to roll it around in that circle. And then we're just going to keep, you can see what I'm doing there. And then we're just going to keep going down in size of hole a little at a time. We'll take off a little bit of the clay. You can dip it again in the water to keep getting to the soft part and wipe it off, and then keep going down till you get to the smallest size that you need for it to be able to fit in the arm. And I do pause every once in a while to measure with the arm, and also to wipe off the clay that I've carved off with the circle template. And then you'll always have these surprising things that happen, especially when you're me. But for now, basically just wiping it off, making sure that I can see where I'm at. Basically, wipe off your template. Otherwise, the clay will just keep caking back up on it. And it's starting to get where I could say it's about 1/3. And you want to look at how it can bend, because you do want to be able to bend the wrist. But it's starting to look a little bit like it should, I think. And this is working well to make it a nice round ball on the end too. So now we're ready for a surprise. The surprise is that the ball comes off of the hand. Because I've been working that thing hard. So, okay. Well, there's just one thing to do here, and that's put it back on the hand. So I'm moistening inside the hand where the ball is, and then around on the outside. And if you need to, you could always add clay again to it. I didn't necessarily have to, because it had softened up enough that it was just perfect to fit back in there, actually. So just smooth it down. We'll let it dry. I did the other hand off camera, but I didn't break that one. So now we have our hands. That's really what this video is all about. Sculpting the hands, putting the ball on the hands, making sure you have them the right size for the arm, making sure you have them the same size on each side, making sure the ball fits into the wrist. So at this point, I'm pretty pleased with how this has went. Again, a little surprised that I'm pleased, but hey, we'll take it, right? All right, next, guess what we're going to work on? I think it's going to be the hardest thing. I mean, I thought the feet were pretty hard. I thought the hands were time consuming, but I liked doing it. I don't know. I didn't really like doing the feet. I don't know why. I think they just weren't that good looking. The next part that's going to be hard, the hardest part though, is the face. I'm telling you, we were going to have some fun with the face, because it's hard to get a face out of clay look like a human. But I have my base. Stay tuned for the next video. We're going to try to make this look like a girl. Thanks for watching. Bye.